Welcome to the third week of this Season 2 of Shadowlands. We have gone through the first pre-season week, then the first week of Heroic Raiding and Capped Mythic Plus, then the second week, which was the opening of Mythic Raiding, and the second week of Mythic Plus with the unlocked item level, and now we have gone full circle. We are restarting with a Tyrannical Affix in Mythic Plus, as well as the second reset of Mythic Raiding. I hope you had considerable to average luck in your Great Vault with some upgrades. It's kind of early still, because most of your gear is still in the sub 230 level or so, getting a 252 from the Great Vault, for example, should be pretty likely to be an upgrade, unless you are the guy who gets offered double useless trinket and then the only piece of gear you get is in the same slot of your Legendary, in which case, well, F in the chat, unfortunately. It will be better luck next week. So what we're going over today is Blizzard, first of all, has put out some hotfixes, some well-needed hotfixes. Number one is the one related to more shards for everyone. So apparently now, once you defeat Sylvanas, regardless of the difficulty, so you can go in there in normal as well, you will have to wait a couple of weeks for the LFR version, but normal should still be doable. The boss will give you a guaranteed Shard of Domination. Now, the luckier ones, by this point, have actually already gotten all of the shards that they wanted, and then there are people like us who are stuck at like 3 to 4 shards still. So at the very least now defeating Sylvanas is going to award you 1 shard guaranteed. The other thing that has been happening with Sylvanas is that prior to yesterday people thought that the bow had been made normal item level for all difficulties 233, and then you had the items that could upgrade it. You had the Ethereal Fletching to upgrade it to Mythic, and then you had the Wraith Wisp Sinew to upgrade it to Heroic level. So you loot this, and then the next kills, instead of looting the bow itself, you can no longer get a copy of the bow, you can loot these items instead to upgrade it. Now, what happened is that someone ended up looting a Heroic version of the bow from Heroic Sylvanas. So, at this point, the question is, wait, was that intended? Because up to this point, up to yesterday, basically for 2 resets, there was nobody else who got a Heroic bow from Sylvanas, but now somebody did. So I wonder whether or not that is a mistake, or not making it drop in Heroic in the first place, if you defeat Sylvanas in Heroic difficulty, was a mistake in the first place. However, we shouldn't spend too much time talking about this, because it's just a bow, and it's just for hunters, right? Nobody outside hunter players should care about this issue. So let's talk about an issue that is going to touch more of the player base, which is the reputation with the Archivist. The Archivist Codex, once you reach tier 6 of the reputation, will award you with the socket item as well as the conduit upgrade item. So the first people around yesterday were able to reach rank 6. So with all the research they had stockpiled, remember initially, back in the day, research was capped at 10,000, and then Blizzard raised it at 20,000 until eventually they gave up and just allowed you to stockpile it. So considering that the socket item, for example, only costs 5,000 research, and it's going to take you 75,000 research converted into reputation to get to tier 6, you should have tons of stockpiled research to buy however many sockets and like half a dozen or even a dozen conduit upgrades that you want. The first part was the more likely one, the more obvious one, which is the fact that you cannot put one of these normal sockets in a piece of gear with a Shard of Domination. So you can't have 2 different sockets in the same piece. That was the more obvious one. The less obvious one was the fact that both of them, so both of the conduit upgrade and the socket upgrade, were not account-wide. This was counterintuitive because what Blizzard did in 9.0.5 was to make the rewards from Venari account-wide. The only ones who weren't account-wide were the ones from the MO. You could get account-wide rewards for Torghast, so the buffs inside Torghast, as well as the conduit upgrade item and the socket item. You are now able to just send them to your alts, or maybe use your alts to use the Stygia on your alts to send it to your main. So people assumed this would have continued in the next tier, in the next season, when you have a faction which essentially does the same thing. This Archivist Codex is basically the new Venari. So considering Venari was given account-wide rewards, this one likely should have gotten the same. Turns out it wasn't like that. Turns out these rewards were just soulbound to the player who reached rank 6 with the reputation and couldn't send it to any of its other characters on his account. Blizzard quickly rectified this, as they likely saw the incoming and upcoming outrage. Maybe not as quickly because very few people got to rank 6, so they wouldn't have the normal player base all reaching rank 6 close to each other at the same time, so they would all start complaining en masse. For that to happen, we would have probably had to wait another 2 to 3 weeks for way more people to reach rank 6 and realize they can't send this to any of their characters. So Blizzard now preemptively adjusted this, they preemptively fixed this. Now the Alloy Warping Phaestor and the Deathbound Shard are now purchasable on all characters on your account, provided you have one character who has reached tier 6 research. So, if you have kept doing dailies, for example, in Korthia with some of your alts, as I mentioned, the price for this item, for the socket item, for example, is pretty cheap. It's just 5,000 research, so even your alts that are lagging behind, still at tier 2 or tier 3 research, should still have like 10 to 15,000 archived research stockpiles. So as soon as your main gets to tier 6, you can actually use the alts research to buy the sockets if you need to. The main point of contention related to these sockets is, of course, the fact that now certain class based on armor, so plate, mail, cloth, and leather, they will have less sockets based on the slots in which the Shards of Domination are going to go in conflict with normal sockets. For example, every class is going to have a Shard of Domination in the helmet. And, of course, as you have played Season 1, the helmet was one of the pieces where you could put a socket. So right now, you won't be able to put a normal socket in your Shard of Domination socket helmet. So that's already one less socket you can use. And then, based on where your other Shards of Domination sockets go, which vary based on armor type, you will end up having less. For example, cloth users also have Shards of Domination in the bracers and in the belt. Bracers and belt are slots for the Shards of Domination, which means at the very best, cloth users will only be able to use 3 normal sockets, the necklace and the 2 rings. As a complete opposite, you can see that leather doesn't have any other conflict besides the helm, so they will be able to use 5 normal sockets. So essentially 2 sockets more than what cloth users can. If you are a cloth user and you want to see the glass half full, well, sockets have been nerfed by a lot compared to BFA. They are much less of a power upgrade compared to before. It's not as relevant and important to get sockets like it was in BFA, so there is that at least. It is still definitely going to feel pretty bad if you're a cloth user, you know, a mage, a warlock, a priest. The knowledge that you have to grind Korthia dailies, or, you know, spend like 2 hours a day grinding all the rares, making sure you've done everything, and then at the end, what you're getting at the end for getting tier 6 rather quickly is just 3 measly sockets. So that is kind of bad, and I do think it's kind of an oversight. Like, I think they could have arranged this a little bit better, especially the different type of Shards of Domination pieces for different armor types. I think they could have just made them all stationary for all the armor types, so they would have had some balance, some evenness amongst all of the armor types. This is just going to help people getting more triggered, basically. Now, on a more varied note, away from all these minor changes, we have the new weekly reset of Mythic Plus. So, we have new affixes, we are back on Tyrannical. The first Tyrannical week was, was good. It was good because it was Raging and Volcanic. This was the first week of the new affix of Tormented. The previous week was the pre-season, it did not have Tormented yet, so we started with Tyrannical, we went through Fortified up until yesterday, and now we have another Tyrannical week. Now, here's the thing. This week is Tyrannical, Spiteful, and Necrotic. As we pointed out before, and here it is, this is the old list of affix rotation for Season 1. As we mentioned already, Season 2 would have had a different set of affixes. So last season, the boogeyman of Tyrannical weeks, which was Necrotic, Necrotic was paired with Inspiring, and Necrotic was paired with Bolstering. So, at the very least, if you wanted to look at this with positive mindset, you wouldn't have had to deal with Necrotic Bolstering and Necrotic Inspiring this season. However, unfortunately, you might say, Necrotic is still in the game, and so is Bolstering. So, those affixes will have to go somewhere. Now, considering Necrotic can't go with Bolstering and can't go with Inspiring, because it was with them last season, The other affixes left possible to be paired with Necrotic were Volcanic, which has been moved to Tyrannical. Last season, Volcanic was in Fortified. You had Necrotic and Raging, which was also kind of counterintuitive and would have done the same thing. You know, as soon as the mobs enrage, you have to kite, so you would have had to kite anyways because of Necrotic, so it's unlikely it was going to be paired together. So you have Explosive and not even Storming, because Storming has also been moved to Fortified. So what you have left basically was Spiteful, was Explosive, and then one of the old Fortified affixes which are going to be moved to Tyrannical. The possible one with the highest odds of being one is probably going to be Sanguine. So out of all of this, you know, Spiteful is still somewhat bad. It has been made much more manageable compared to Season 1 after it was nerfed. Remember that now Spiteful takes a little bit longer to activate, and the range, you know, the range in which they can smack you has gone rather down. Remember also that Necrotic has been nerfed. Blizzard before this season, tried to nerf Necrotic by making it only apply every other hit. So basically nerfed by 50%. Instead of getting to 20 stacks in 20 hits, you were getting to 10 stacks in 20 hits because it wasn't applying as fast. And then Blizzard said, no, that's too much. That's too big of a nerf. So instead, they nerfed the application of Necrotic only for the big enemies, only for the big elites. You know, the big guy in the trash pack, right? Those guys are still going to apply it only every other hit. So their application of Necrotic is going to be reduced, at a reduced effectiveness, which is ultimately not, you know, not the more dangerous thing of Necrotic. The danger of Necrotic is when you pull multiple small guys and they stack Necrotic up very highly, not the big guy. The big guy is fine, but still, at the very least, it helps you a little bit. What I think is also good is the fact that now that Spiteful is with Necrotic, it's going to make it less likely, roughly 50% less likely, to be put together with Bolstering. So now, you know, Bolstering is not going to be with Necrotic, Bolstering is unlikely to be put together with Spiteful. So there aren't really that many terrible combinations left for Bolstering. Yes, some might argue that Bolstering on its own is already terrible, doesn't matter who you put it next to, but still, at the very least, it's not going to be as depressing as seeing and knowing you have a Bolstering Necrotic week like you had in Season 1. At least we know that's gone, which is good because it was not a good affix. Now, I wanted to finish the video with the last part related to the powers, the Anima Powers you get in Mythic Plus. Because, you know, I've already started seeing some people complaining. I mean, is it surprising? Is it surprising we have people complaining about anything? No, it's not. But I thought it was worth looking into. So the complaint is that, now this new affix in this new season, Tormented, I'm already picking the same powers every time. There isn't much diversity. Well, remember that this was the decision made by Blizzard to make this more, of course, more fair, because it would have felt terrible if, for example, if you're a DPS, okay, and you get offered Raging Battle Axe, and then another Raging Battle Axe, and then Volcanic Plumage. Meanwhile, the best another DPS can get in the same run is the Dripping Fang Leech power, the Stone Ward defensive power, and Regenerative Fungus for healing. There would have been a pretty significant difference in damage, and the guy who got unlucky would feel bad. Even though you timed the key, even though you did fine and you had no issue, it still felt bad that you just had 10 to 15% less damage simply because you were unlucky with powers, right? So Blizzard said, okay, fine, we're going to avoid that from happening, and we're going to make it even more strict, because the bosses, the order of these mini bosses is going to change every week and depending on the dungeon. So maybe it could be terrible, for example, to leave some very powerful power options for the last mini boss that you get for last, so you don't get to use it for most of the dungeon. Meanwhile, you get to choose weaker powers at the start. Blizzard said no to that as well. All of the mini bosses are going to have fixed powers all the time, and all of the different roles, DPS, tank, and healers, are going to have their own fixed choices. And some people have already went through the complaints. Do I have to go 6 months now picking Champion's Brand every time, right? The secondary stat buff, which is generally speaking the stronger one for an all-purpose pick. because of course it also, scales with your stats, it scales with your power, with your class, your spec, your talents and whatnot. Whereas the other powers are either just fixed, a fixed percentage, or they scale just with your attack power or spell power. Generally speaking, you can scale harder with secondary stats. I think the better way, if I wanted to look for a fix, for different picks, for different situations, the better way would be to give you powers that can do something with the weak. So the better choice could have been, depending on what week we have, you can have powers that are maybe slightly weaker overall, but help you deal with one of the affixes. For example, they might help you deal with bolstering, they might help you deal with necrotic, or they might help you deal with inspiring, right? Because for example, this week is Spiteful and Necrotic. It's a very good week because there are two affixes that you might have tools to deal with, right? Roots and knockbacks and slows do very well against Spiteful and also against Necrotic. So what is there in terms of powers that you can choose that can give you any of this? There are no slows and no snares and no roots or anything of the sort that can help you deal with Spiteful when it comes to powers, and also there is basically nothing that can help you deal with Necrotic. You can see that there are some powers that can be useful. For example, Tiny Dancing Shoes. Generally speaking, it's not very useful. Generally speaking, this is not going to happen very often. If this was spells, if this was just attacks in general, it would have been very strong, but unfortunately it's just melee or ranged hits. However, it becomes very powerful in Spiteful. So in Spiteful, if you are not that good at dodging them, or if you simply want to be safe, you can just take Tiny Dancing Shoes and you can guarantee yourself almost always to be able to, let's say, fail twice at dodging Spiteful, and you won't be taking any damage. This is a good example of a power when it comes to Spiteful. When you look at Necrotic, there isn't much in terms of power, or even Spiteful when it comes to the CC. There is no real CC offer in the powers other than the Gavel of Judgment, the 2-second stun with a 30-second CD. That's the only one, and it's single target. I don't think it's tiring or boring to choose the powers. I actually do enjoy them as a healer. So when I can choose between Bottle of Sanguine Ichor, Champion's Brand, and Pedestal of Utter Hubris, I think it's pretty good choices. When you can choose between, again, Champion's Brand, Overflowing Chalice for mana, or the Diamond Alembic, I think it's also pretty good. For example, this week is Tyrannical. This week you can have longer fights. It can be harder, to keep up your mana in a longer Tyrannical fight, so you can go for Overflowing Chalice. You're like, I don't need, 210 more secondary stats for this 3.5-minute boss fight. I want more mana, so you can take the Chalice, whereas when it's fortified, you might not need it. But I do think if the issue of this affix over time is going to be the staleness, the min-maxing of the powers, people realizing that power number 1, 4, and 7 are always the best, then they just pick them all the time, the possible solution would have been to make them rotate every week. So essentially add more powers and then make them rotate every week, so it's not exactly the same every time. At the very worst, it's going to be exactly the same for every single type of affix combination. You will only see one affix combination every 3 months. There are 12 different weeks of affix combinations, so it's going to take you a long time before you see another combination of affixes. I think that would have been a better way of making this a little bit more diverse. Overall, though, I have to say, I am pretty fine with the system. I think it's better overall than Prideful. In general, I always had a more soft touch when it comes to tanks. I think this is going to help them. If this is something that can help tanks a little bit more, or just can help players tank more, play more as tank, it's always good. And definitely Prideful wasn't a very friendly affix for tanks. This one that we have right now is much more affordable, much more approachable to tanks. So I think this is better just because of that, without all the other things to put into consideration. Now after this, we have to stop. We have to stop because it's actually late. I have to leave, and then I have to come back, and I have to raid as well tonight. So thank you guys for watching the video. If you have enjoyed the video and you want to support more tanks in Mythic Plus keys, you can subscribe, like, follow, and donate to my charity to Forgotten DPS Specs. You can mail your donation directly to the chairman of the foundation, Mr. Survival Hunter. So, see you guys soon, and in the meantime, okay, it's time to go and open my Great Vault. I guess you will see the result of that tomorrow.